when I'm the one who's the closest to you? I'm the one who created you. This is the second argument. I'm the one who created you. So if anyone's going to know what's going to happen to you, it's going to be me. If anyone knows about your essence, if anyone knows about where you came from, what's happening to you now, what's going to happen to you in the future, it's going to be the one who's giving existence to you. Yes, like a mother and a father might turn to their child and say, listen, we're the ones who raised you. Yes, believe us when we say this. Now, of course, with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's different because that relationship, of course, is a different relationship. نَحْنُ خَلَقْنَاكُمْ فَلَوْلَا تُصَدِّقُونَ Why don't you believe when we tell you? أَفَرَأَيْتُمْ مَا تُمْنُونَ Now, in these verses that we have in Surah Al-Waqi'ah moving forward, you will find a number of questions that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to raise. And these are rhetorical questions, meaning it's not really a question. It's supposed to be a reminder. The first of those, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to remind the human being who keeps sitting there and saying, I don't know if there's going to be another world, who's seen this next world anyways, and so on and so forth. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to humble the human being and help him understand that there are things in this world that the human being can't explain, let alone the next world. There are things in this world you don't have power over it, meaning someone else has power over it. Now you're telling me the next world, we don't know about it. So right here, there are things you can't even explain. So the first of those is what? أَفَرَأَيْتُمْ مَا تُمْنُونَ Yes, the Quran says the seed that leaves the body. Yes, the sperm, to be frank. Yes, the Quran says that sperm. أَأَنْتُمْ تَخْلُقُونَهُ أَمْ نَحْنُ الْخَالِقُونَ Did you create that? Or we're the ones who created that? The Quran speaks about the nutfa very, very often. Yes? And it's interesting because the Quran obviously considers the nutfa to be filthy and najis and so on and so forth, right? But then the Quran speaks of its creation. And the Quran speaks of the wonders that are in this drop of fluid. How is it? You know, in the words of one Western speaker, he said this very beautifully. He said when the embryo comes together, yes, the egg and the sperm and so on and so forth, he said when this is happening in the womb, somewhere in there, the color of the eyes of that children are in there, somewhere. Where and how and in what way, we don't know. Somewhere in there, in that DNA and in those genes, all the meticulous details that are going to make you the unique human being that you are. All of that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has done taqdeer of it. All of it Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has measured it. That's why you are who you are today. That's why you're not the same person as the person sitting beside you. Yes? Because when someone was drawing you up, they drew you up in a way that's unique from the person sitting beside you. And all of that came from what? It came from this embryo. This is the power of the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, the Quran poses this question to you and I. أَفَرَأَيْتُمْ مَا تُمْنُونَ أَأَنْتُمْ تَخْلُقُونَهُ أَمْ نَحْنُ الْخَالِقُونَ You guys do that magic, or is it us that we do the magic? Now you're sitting there and you're saying, I don't know if what he's saying about the next world, first explain this world, then we can take your opinion on the next world. First explain how you can explain what's happening here, then we'll talk about the next world. He continues, نَحْنُ قَدَّرْنَا بَيْنَكُمُ الْمَوْتِ وَمَا نَحْنُ بِمَسْبُوقِينَ We are the ones who have dedicated death for each and every one of you. وَمَا نَحْنُ بِمَسْبُوقِينَ And no one can get ahead of us. No one can get ahead of us means what? Meaning no one can stop us from doing what we're doing. No one can live forever. It's up to us. We have dedicated death. And it's very interesting because you and I typically look at death as something that is a failure of the body. Normally, we say something went wrong with this body, that what happened? This person is now leaving this world. The Quran says, yes, there is a failure, but that is our work. There is a cause for death. There always is a cause for death. But there is a taqdeer behind that failure. There is a thoughtful, intentional process behind this heart not beating anymore, behind the blood pressure having this issue, whatever the cause of death might have been. نَحْنُ قَدَّرْنَا We did taqdeer. Taqdeer means what? Means imagine you had a place to work with, you decide where everything goes. You measure everything. You decide the affairs of everything. This is taqdeer. The Quran says, نَحْنُ قَدَّرْنَا بَيْنَكُمْ. We decide when that death is going to come. For you and I, of course, it looks like a failure or some cause of death, something went wrong that this death is taking place. The Quran says that's fine. From your perspective, it's okay. You can look at it that way. If you want to go behind the scenes, there's a taqdeer that is happening. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chooses when this person is going to go, when this person is not. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chooses for a person not to go for 1,000 years, 1,400 years, and counting, as in the case of our 12th Imam, he can do that. As in the case of Prophet Isa alayhi salam, which is agreed upon in all schools of thought within Islam, he can do that. Why? Because death is not something going wrong that God loses control over things. Death is something Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does taqdeer of. He decides. He is measuring the life of this person. وَمَا نَحْنُ بِمَسْبُوقِينَ. And we are not the ones who people can get ahead of us. When we decide, it's going to happen. When this person who's disobeying God, we're the ones who are allowing him to live right now. We're allowing his heart to beat. He doesn't see it that way. But let him know that we are not masbuqa. Nobody gets ahead of us. Nobody determines things without our power. He's alive because we decided for him to be alive. And the ones who go, we decide for them to go. Then the Quran continues, عَلَىٰ أَن نُبَدِّلَ أَمْثَالَكُمْ. Not only can we do that, we bring in new groups of people. There were people who weren't here before. We replace them with a new group of people. وَنُنْشِئَكُمْ فِي مَا لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. And then we create you again in a world that you have no knowledge of. This is where? This is the day of judgment. This is the akhirah. This world that is a mystery to you and I. Yes, the Quran gives us some examples. The Quran says there's a tree called Zaqum. Try telling your children there's a tree called Zaqum. Yes? They'll think it's like this beautiful tree, yes, that's standing there. It's Zaqum, it's a bad thing, so on and so forth. These are examples the Quran gives to you and I, just so we have a rough idea. Just so we have a general understanding of it. Otherwise, you and I don't understand the realities of that world. The Quran says, وَنُنْشِئَكُمْ فِي مَا لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Inshallah, we're going to talk more about this the following week. وَلَقَدْ عَلِمْتُمُ النَّشْأَةَ الْأُولَى فَلَوْلَا تَذَكَّرُونَ. You all have seen the first nash'ah, the first chapter, this world. You've seen the power that we have here. فَلَوْلَا تَذَكَّرُونَ. So how come you don't believe us when we say we have the same power in the next world? You say in this world, you can't explain how life happens, yes? This famous atheist, yes, his name I'm forgetting right now, the author of the God Delusion. I'm forgetting his name right now. Dawkins, yes. Dawkins, in his book, he talks about this, the God Delusion. A whole book, chapter about how God doesn't exist and this and that. It's interesting, he says, we can explain everything through evolution. That's no problem. Except some things we're still trying to figure out. And we're still trying to figure out, and I don't have an answer for it. We're still trying to figure out means I thought I knew what I was talking about, but my hypothesis doesn't answer some portions of the problem. So what's the portion we can't figure out? Life. How does life happen? Yes, evolution can explain to you, for example, a body that was this big, how does it get bigger? A creation that was simplistic, how does it get more sophisticated? Yes? Vision that was simple, how does it reach the sophisticated version of vision that you and I, yes, these are things that evolution can potentially explain. But life, how does something go from being dead to alive, to being dead again? We don't know. And unless you have a religious framework to explain it, you have no way to understand it, yes? And this is from the people who are very serious about it. Yes, evolution explains everything. There's no need for a God anymore. These things are backward things, the God of the gaps. We don't have any more gaps anymore. Except the most miraculous thing that's happening in the world, we don't know how to explain it. And that is life. This beautiful process that happens. Now, what happens in the body of this human being? That before life is given to it, it's lifeless. Then life is given to it, It moves around, it has emotions, it has intellect, it does different things. Then the moment that life is taken from it again, it falls there lifeless. You can weigh that body. That body weighs the same amount as compared to before, at least if you do it quickly. Yes? What happens? What is this mystery of life? We don't know. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says we are the ones who are in charge of that. Therefore, I can go anywhere and everywhere in this world. Unless I can explain where this life comes from, there is no escape from a greater power and a greater creator. Inshallah, with this we'll end our first khutbah. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد وعجل فرجه. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد وعجل فرجه. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد وعجل فرجه. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. أثني عليه حامدا وأذكره مسبحا. ثم أصلي وأسلم على نجيبه وجليله وحافظ سره الذي سمي في السماء بأحمد وفي الأرضين بأبي القاسم محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد. اللهم صل وسلم على علي أمير المؤمنين وفاطمة الزهراء سيدة نساء العالمين وعلى سبطي نبي الرحمة وإمامي الهدى الحسن والحسين سيدي شباب أهل الجنة وعلى علي بن الحسين ومحمد بن علي وجعفر بن محمد وموسى بن جعفر وعلي بن موسى ومحمد بن علي وعلي بن محمد والحسن بن علي والخلف الهادي المهدي حججك على عبادك وأمنائك في أرضك. صلوات. اللهم صل. اللهم اغفر للمؤمنين والمؤمنات. عباد الله أوصيكم ونفسي بتقوى الله. We remind all of you and myself first and foremost to maintain the taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Unfortunately, the onslaught that has been taking place in Palestine continues in front of the eyes of millions of people around the world. I want to do a quick recap, and I'm sure many of you have been following along with all of the different events. How can we not? How can we not when you find individuals who normally would be quiet in these situations? Of course, the situation with Gaza is something that has been happening for a very long time. So you find many times people who are normally quiet in situations like this, because of the severity of the situation this time, even they are speaking out. Even people who normally would be quiet about all of these discussions, yes? Even they are speaking out at this point. Of course, what happened was the hospital and the bombing of the hospital, which of course got lost in the propaganda. And who's to say this, who's to say that? Good luck trying to say this is what happened with it or that's what happened with it. Yes? When you tune into Western media outlets, this is already a done deal. So they're absolved of it. Now if you bring it up, you're the one who looks weird. You're the one who looks different. You know, I found, I think it was Piers Morgan, the British, journalist who brought this up. He said, listen, he was speaking to one of his guests. He said, listen, the BBC did a third-party, impartial investigation into this situation. And they said likely it was not the Israeli army. The BBC. And you put BBC and impartial in the same sentence, we have bigger issues there. He said the BBC did an impartial investigation. Okay. What did happen, which was, I believe, last night, if I'm not mistaken, was the bombing of one of the oldest churches in the world. This is the Saint Porphyrius Church in Gaza City. This is north of Gaza. This one was understood. The Israeli army already talked about it. And of course, when they were talked about casualties and civilians and things of that nature, what was the response? The incident is under review. This is textbook. This is typical. Yes? This happens all the time. This was a church that was built in the year 1150. Yes? One of the oldest churches in the world. You should see the footage from Christians. Yani the first point I mentioned last week, I said this is not about religion and so on and so forth, as so many people make it out to be. Unfortunately, we have influencers who now have this take, unfortunately. They think they're very sophisticated. You know, they understood the whole issue. So yeah, as if to say, I'll summarize what their whole point is. And if the Muslims and Jews would have falafel and hummus together more often, this problem would have been solved by now. This is their take. Yes? As if this has to do something with religion. Christians having their churches bombed. Residential homes being bombed. Food storages, bakeries have been bombed. The reality is things are changing. I think this is something that, you know, growing up, going to protests for Palestine and so on and so forth, I do see this changing. The narrative is changing. There's no doubt about it. But like I said it last week, at such a heavy cost. You know, we're seeing something that is, at least the talk and the tone is definitely genocidal. When army officials come out and say the emphasis is not on accuracy, it's on destruction. That type of talk is a problem. When Palestinians are called children of darkness, that's genocidal talk. That's preliminaries. You can look this up, yes? There's multiple steps before genocide takes place. The most important step is dehumanizing the other side. Presenting the other side as if they're not human. Yes? Because if they're not human, what do you care? When you had a cockroach come into your house, forgive me for using this analogy, when you had a cockroach come into your house and you just killed it or got rid of it or whatever, yes, there was no international outcry. Why? It was a cockroach. It wasn't a human. Yes? This is the talk that you're hearing right now. And we have been hearing this talk. Yes? The reality is, though, the narrative is changing. You find younger individuals in different parts of the world are increasingly opening up their eyes to what's happening on the ground. I want to, for all of us, inshallah, when you get a chance, if you haven't already, there was a very beautiful interview done by Piers Morgan where he had Bassem Youssef on, this Egyptian comedian. And he had a very interesting approach to the whole interview. And I would suggest everyone to watch the whole interview. There's a couple words in there that aren't, suitable for our children. But outside of that, I think it's a very important interview to watch. And in that interview, this comedian, who of course had taken a comedic approach to something very, very crucial, something very, very serious. Yes? I want to take one of the points that he emphasized, because I think this point is lost in this whole discussion. This whole discussion, the root cause is completely lost, and it's completely ignored, and that is on purpose. It's on purpose to get into this tit versus tat thing. It's on purpose to get into this rocket and that rocket thing. This is on purpose. Because the fundamental cause for this whole issue wants to be completely forgotten and left silent, and no one needs to be talking about that. He had a very good point. Bassem Youssef, in this interview that he had, he said, listen, I condemn everything that happened on October 7th, and I'm just quoting his words, yes? I condemn everything that happened on October 7th. It was terrible, so on and so forth. Let's imagine a world where this militant group and that militant group don't even exist. And let's call that world the West Bank. For those who don't know, in the West Bank, there are no militant groups. West Bank is formally run by the Palestinian Authority, yes? Let's call it the West Bank. So what's happening in the West Bank anyways? If the militant groups are all the problems and so on and so forth, and we're told to condemn them, and we condemn them, and so on and so forth. Okay, what's happening in the West Bank? What's the root cause of what's happening? I would encourage all of our dear brothers and sisters to go and look at the maps that show you what's happening in the West Bank. Because normally what's said is what? Yes, Gaza, West Bank, these are the two areas where Palestinians live. It's under Palestinian control. It's not under Palestinian control. The West Bank is not under Palestinian control. Go and look at how fractioned the areas that Palestinians have control over are. This is basic Google search you can do on this, yes? So what happens in the West Bank? First thing that happens, now imagine, put yourself in this situation, yes? I'm not even talking about October 7th. Well, let's go back. Let's go back 10, 15 years. Let's talk about the major issue here, yes? Imagine you're living in this type of a situation. So you wake up, you want to go to work because you have to provide for your family. Well, the first thing you have to deal with is checkpoints. What are checkpoints? This is within Palestinian, quote unquote, area. Checkpoints, what does that mean? That means nothing. You have to wait for 3 hours in line. 3 hours going there, 3 hours getting back. Imagine the humiliation. Imagine the subjugation. Imagine how suppressed you feel every single day. There's checkpoints. Then there's, of course, settlements. This is international law. This is not even like, what I'm saying is like boring stuff, I'll put it that way, yeah? Settlements in the West Bank, constantly. Added, yes? This was so obvious. The previous president spoke about this. I don't know for those who remember, yes? Trump spoke about this. He said it in such an informal way, people were laughing at it. He said, yeah, and the Israeli prime minister needs to take it easy with the, I don't know if you guys remember this clip, needs to take it easy with the settlements. What does that mean? International law is saying these settlements aren't supposed to be there. Okay, this is the West Bank. I'm not even talking about this and that. No, this is West Bank. This is supposed to be heaven, yeah? This is where Palestinians are supposed to have their own, authority and freedom and so on and so forth. What else happens? Kicking people out of their homes. You all have seen the viral video of Jacob from New York, yes? Who of course doesn't represent the Jewish population in New York. Jacob, he told the family, if I don't take your house, someone else is going to take it. This is not in Gaza, this or that. This is in the West Bank. Settlements. What else is happening there? Hate speech. Settlers. We're going to get rid of all of you. Referring to the Arabs. Now, some of these Arabs are Christian, some of them are Muslim. Or the majority are Muslim, of course, and there are some who are Christians as well. Surveillance. No, this West Bank, brothers and sisters, it's like another prison. If you go and live there, it's like another prison. So the major issue is not this tit-for-tat thing that the media wants you to focus on, yes? The major issue is what Ayatollah Sistani mentioned in his message, and that is an occupation. That is an occupation. And this occupation has created the problems that we are unfortunately seeing today. And of course, who pays the price for this occupation? The civilians in different parts of Palestine. This year, in 2023, so far, 30-something kids have been shot dead. Children have been shot dead in the West Bank. That's not even the number of adults. That's the number of kids. This is the part of Palestinians' lives that we are told everything should be fine over here. 2022, per human rights groups, was the deadliest year ever in the West Bank. Why? Because this 12-year-old who's throwing stones from far away is going to get shot with live ammunition. This is the West Bank. These are the fundamental issues that you and I, first of all, need to educate ourselves on. Yes? And number two, understand that this is where the major issue is. I don't even want to get into Palestinian prisoners. Over 150 children are kept as Palestinian prisoners. Yes, in prisons, children. Every civilian hostage, we believe, should be returned to their family. Yes, absolutely. We're all on the same page about that. Yes? But your racism shows when you only care about some hostages. Your racism shows where some hostages, you care about them. Other hostages, you could care less if they rot in prison. This is a problem. You know how many of these Palestinian prisoners have not even had due process? None of these are my words, by the way. These are all human rights groups who've talked about this. Yes? So this, brothers and sisters, is the major issue. So as we continue to advocate for the Palestinian people, we always have to, first of all, educate ourselves on the history of this issue and always emphasize on the more foundational issue here, which is, per Ayatollah Sistani, the cause for a lot of the other issues we're seeing in the region. This is an issue that is only, at this point, in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I know many of you have done this before. We can only continue to do this at this point, is to, first of all, educate ourselves and educate others on this topic, and also to pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He brings His faraj and He brings His convenience to a people who have been subjugated for a very, very long time. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. اللهم صل على محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد. اللهم صل على محمد. الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. وأن عليا حجة الله صلى الله وسلامه عليه. حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح حي على خير العمل حي على خير العمل. قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة. الله أكبر الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله. استغفر الله ربي وأتوب. الله أكبر. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يسبح لله ما في السماوات وما في الأرض الملك القدوس العزيز الحكيم. هو الذي بعث في الأميين رسولا منهم يتلو عليهم آياته ويزكيهم ويعلمهم الكتاب والحكمة وإن كانوا من قبل لفي ضلال مبين. وآخرين منهم لما يلحقوا بهم وهو العزيز الحكيم. ذلك فضل الله يؤتيه من يشاء والله ذو الفضل العظيم. مثل الذين حملوا التوراة ثم لم يحملوها كمثل الحمار يحمل أسفارا. بئس مثل القوم الذين كذبوا بآيات الله والله لا يهدي القوم الظالمين. قل يا أيها الذين هادوا إن زعمتم أنكم أولياء لله من دون الناس فتمنوا الموت إن كنتم صادقين ولا يتمنونه أبدا بما قدمت أيديهم والله عليم بالظالمين. قل إن الموت الذي تفرون منه فإنه ملاقيكم ثم تردون إلى عالم الغيب والشهادة فينبئكم بما كنتم تعملون. يا أيها الذين آمنوا إذا نودي للصلاة من يوم الجمعة فاسعوا إلى ذكر الله وذروا البيع ذلكم خير لكم إن كنتم تعلمون. فإذا قضيت الصلاة فانتشروا في الأرض وابتغوا من فضل الله واذكروا الله كثيرا لعلكم تفلحون وإذا رأوا تجارة أو لهوا انفضوا إليها وتركوك قائما قل ما عند الله خير من اللهو ومن التجارة والله خير الرازقين. الله أكبر. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم ارزقنا توفيق الطاعة وبعد المعصية. اللهم عجل لوليك الفرج. اللهم اغفر للمؤمنين والمؤمنات والمسلمين والمسلمات. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. الله أكبر. بحول الله وقوته أقوم وأقعد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده سمع الله لمن حمده. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم ارزقنا توفيق الطاعة وبعد المعصية. اللهم عجل لوليك الفرج. اللهم اغفر للمؤمنين والمؤمنات والمسلمين والمسلمات. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. يا لطيف ارحم عبدك الضعيف. الله أكبر. بسم الله وبالله الحمد لله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. السلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. لا إله إلا الله العظيم الحليم، لا إله إلا الله رب العرش الكريم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. اللهم إني أسألك موجبات رحمتك وعزائم مغفرتك والغنيمة من كل بر والسلامة من كل إثم. اللهم لا تدع لي ذنبا إلا غفرته، ولا هما إلا فرجته، ولا سقما إلا شفيته، ولا عيبا إلا سترته، ولا رزقا إلا بسطته، ولا خوفا إلا آمنته، ولا سوءا إلا صرفته، ولا حاجة هي لك رضا ولي فيها صلاح إلا قضيتها يا أرحم الراحمين. آمين رب العالمين.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Just one quick announcement that we have to make. Tomorrow, inshallah, Saturday the 21st, we'll have the visit to our Marhumin program. Inshallah, this will start at 2:30 with the recitation of Quran and Marsiya, followed by the speech by our beloved Sheikh Mahdi Rastani, followed by Noha and Ziyarat, as well as the visitation to the graves. Again, this will be located at the Muslim cemetery of Denton. We look forward to seeing you all there. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina wa Nabiyyina Muhammad wa alihi tahirin.
الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. صلى على وأن عليا حجة الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح حي على خير العمل حي على خير العمل. قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة. الله أكبر الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله. استغفر الله ربي وأتوب. الله أكبر. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده. الله أكبر. بحول الله وقوته أقوم وأقوم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الله أكبر. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم ارزقنا توفيق الطاعة وبعد المعصية. اللهم عجل لوليك الفرج. اللهم اغفر للمؤمنين والمؤمنات والمسلمين والمسلمات. الله أكبر. سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده سمع الله لمن حمده الله أكبر سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده الله أكبر الله أكبر سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وتقبل شفاعته وارفع درجته بحول الله وقوته أقوم وأقوم الله أكبر سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده سمع الله لمن حمده الله أكبر سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده الله أكبر الله أكبر سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده الله أكبر بحول الله وقوته أقوم وأقوم سبحان الله والحمد لله سبحان الله أكبر سبحان ربي العظيم وبحمده سمع الله لمن حمده الله أكبر سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده الله أكبر الله أكبر سبحان ربي الأعلى وبحمده يا لطيف ارحم عبدك الضعيف الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد السلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله وبركاته السلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد اللهم صل على
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ما شاء الله لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم Inshallah recite dua wahadat all together بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم لا إله إلا الله إلها واحدا ونحن له مسلمون لا إله إلا الله ولا نعبد إلا إياه مخلصين له الدين ولو كره المشركون. لا إله إلا الله ربنا ورب آبائنا الأولين. لا إله إلا الله وحده 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 أنجز وعدا ونصر عبدا وعزى جندا وهزم الأحزاب وحدا. فله الملك وله الحمد يحيي ويميت ويميت ويحيي وهو حي لا يموت بيده الخير وهو على كل شيء قدير.
السلام عليك يا رسول الله، السلام عليك يا حبيب الله، السلام عليك يا أمير المؤمنين علي بن أبي طالب، السلام عليك يا فاطمة الزهراء سيدة نساء العالمين، السلام عليك يا حسن المجتبى، السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله الحسين، السلام على 9 المعصومين من ذرية الحسين، السلام عليك يا صاحب العصر والزمان، السلام عليك يا خليفة الرحمن، السلام عليك يا إمام الإنس والجان ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليكم يا أهل بيت النبوة جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته.